Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I want to welcome you to the California Historical Radio Society. I am Rachel Lee, the Executive Director. I hope you've had a chance to look at the front of the building when you arrived. And before you go, I hope you take a look around. And if you are new and this is your first time here, perhaps come back on a Saturday for a tour. Dan Healy is perhaps best known for his pivotal role with the Grateful Dead, where he served as the band's sound engineer from the late 1960s through the early 1990s. His work with the Grateful Dead not only defined their live sound, but also pioneered many of the techniques and technologies that are now fundamental in live concert sound reinforcement. Dan's innovative use of the wall of sound, a revolutionary live audio system, is still celebrated for its clarity and power, showcasing his ability to push the boundaries of what was technically possible. Beyond his work with the Grateful Dead, Dan Healy's contributions to the audio industry include collaborations with a diverse array of artists and a dedication to improving live sound technology. His expertise and creative vision have made him a sought-after consultant and engineer in various high-profile projects, further cementing his legacy in the field. Please join me in welcoming Dan Healy, a true pioneer in audio engineering and a cherished member of our community.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. This is sort of a home, really, for me. You should know that Rachel just came to us recently, and she was really needed. Her position was really needed. We needed someone like her to take over. She coordinates pretty much the public face of California Historical Radio Society. I've always been a radio freak since I was a little teeny kid, and I fell in with this band of monsters somewhere along the road, and we got involved here. And once I got involved, I was conscripted, and it was a done deal kind of. So because of that, we have all of this here. And I encourage all of you to walk around a little bit before you leave and look around and see what's here. It's more than just radios. It's really the history of radio in the whole Bay Area. And there's some fabulous stuff. If you go in the room down the hall here, you'll see posters and signage and stuff that goes all the way back to the beginning of radio. And it's really wonderful. So I want to thank Rachel, and I think that we're all really happy to have her. Thank you, Rachel. I'm not a professional speaker, and I've barely been able to find my own way by the lack of brilliance of my own light. But I'll take us through a journey and perhaps share some insight to an incredible story that brought change and forever altered the trajectory of sound recording and sound reinforcement. Before we begin, I want to welcome everybody and thank everybody for showing up. Let's have a show of hands here. This is a story I usually tell in a bar over a bunch of drinks, and I'm sitting around and getting drunk with some Deadhead buddies and stuff. But one of the things, how many of you have been to a Grateful Dead show? Oh, okay, all right. Well, the writing is pretty much on the wall. How deep do we want to go into it? Do you want just the fun part of the story, or do you want to go into some of the minutia of it? How deep do we want to go? Do I go deep or medium or what? Show of hands. What's that? Deep as you can. Deep as I can? Oh, I can. How many of you know what a crossover is? Okay, all right. So that gives me some kind of an idea. Along the way, if you can stick your hand up if you have any questions. Sometimes I skip over stuff or I'll leave something unanswered. So feel free to butt in and ask me a question. It won't dissuade me at all. I guess it would fall into the category of, if you'll pardon the expression, the greatest story ever told. Let's see, I got to figure out how to get this to work. And when I began, okay, that was sound equipment when I was in grammar school. That was sound equipment. When you went to sports stadiums or any large public gatherings, those were the loudspeakers that you heard, and they were called public address systems. FDR gave his inaugural speech over those. Lou Gehrig gave his farewell address at the Yankee Stadium on the 4th of July in 1939 over these. They had approximately 200 to 2,000 cycle range, frequency response range, which is basically telephone or minimal voice intelligibility range. And that's what they did, and they were called public address systems. So what happened is in the mid-20s, Western Electric and RCA were commissioned by the movie industry to create a full-range sound speaker system for talking movies. Talking movies were new, and they wanted to be able to reproduce music and have it sound good in the theaters. So they set about designing the equipment that would have full-range audio quality. When I started out, this is the first speakers that I had to use. These were made by Altec, but they were pretty much a mirror of the Western Electric and RCA designs. And they were called the Voice of the Theater. Now, neighborhood theater had one of these behind the screen. Bigger theaters, huge big downtown theaters had one of these. The only real difference is that the extra width and the extra surface area gave a better low frequency response. So these are called reflex cabinets. And reflex cabinets are a product of taking some of the air that comes off the back of the speaker, which is out of phase, and ducting it back around out to the front, so that and if you tune it like a resonator, anybody know what a Helmholtz resonator is? Okay, if you blow on a Coke bottle and it whistles, that's a Helmholtz resonator. It's a single opening. It's a cavity with a single opening that resonates at a certain frequency. And don't be bashful. Hi. No, welcome. And so by having these cabinets be a certain fixed size, they resonate at a certain frequency. And I'll see if I can get this to do it. What happened here? I'll see if I can show that. Okay, you see these slots in the bottom of it. Those are called tuning ports. What happens is that the resonating sound coming off the back of the speakers is bounced off the back of the cabinet, and it comes out there. And the object is that it comes out of phase, and the object is to cancel the irregularities in the frequency response of the bass cabinet. So the speakers themselves, everything has a resonant frequency. Your bones do, your keys do when you ring them, guitar strings do, organ pipes do, a tire iron has it. Anything that has mass has a resonant frequency. The speaker cones have resonant frequencies also, and that's a problem. It makes it really loud at certain frequencies because it's resonant, or there's the least amount of resistance. And so to be able to get past that, what they did, they discovered that by ducting some of the out of phase signal off the back of the speaker out the front, it canceled some of those resonant nodes out, and it flattened out the response. So you got an even bass response that went all the way down low. These were pretty good. These are considered pretty good. Those in the Voice of the Theater was A7s were really what we had. And the horn on top, this thing is finicky. The horn on top, right there. There's a driver. You can see on the back, on the side view of the horn, you can see that driver. Now these speakers here were designed to operate off of 40 watts. And 40 watts back in those days was considered to be a really lot of power. The amplifiers in movie theaters in the racks, they had 40-watt amplifier. And the speaker wires ran down to the stage behind the screen and hooked up to these speakers, and it was controlled from the projection room. But that's where the sound came from. And 40 watts was considered a lot of power. If you take a stack of guitar amps and you start playing and you want to sing through something and hear it beside that, well, you're competing against hundreds of watts of power. So it really when I started using them for sound reinforcement, it didn't really work, which I'll get there in a minute. But what happened was that we began hot rodding all of that stuff. I found a driver that could take 100 watts, and then I found a bass speaker that could take 100 watts, and so I increased it to 100 watts. What we did is we continued to hot rod that stuff until we took it to the very max. We pushed it as far as you can push it, and we got to diminishing returns where you couldn't more power wouldn't get it louder, and more, no matter what we did wouldn't work any better. So we actually bottomed that out, and that's really kind of what started the wall of sound. Let me see where we're going here. Oops. Okay, this amplifier right there, that's an Altec amplifier. That was an 80-watt amplifier. It put out almost close to 100 watts. I had one of those for each of my A7 Voices of Theater speakers. I had 50 of them. I had 25 of them on each side of the stage. But another thing is the combination of the bass cabinet like this right here, a bass, and that's, if it's just one unit and you're sitting in front of it in your living room, that's one thing. But when you want to put a whole bunch of them together, it doesn't do you any good to have multiple ones stacked side by side or one on top of another, because there's a point at which the sound begins to cancel itself. The sound waves come out and they don't come out completely aligned. And that's what time alignment, we hear the word time alignment, that's what time alignment is all about. They don't come out in line, and so when it's not aligned, that means that the phase is different, and they cancel out too. And so +1 and -1 is 0. So what we did is we separated the horns from the bass cabinets. We took all the bass cabinets, we piled them all up vertically. And this is well, I'll get there for a minute. This is another aspect of the wall of sound. We piled them all up vertically, and that's based on the theory from broadcast antennas. And if you look on towers and you drive by and you see huge radio towers, and you see, Bill can tell us that. You see large arrays of FM of antennas, large little fork-looking things, one above another. Those are arrays, right, Bill? And what's that for? Gain. Okay, so what happens is that by stacking them and lining them perfectly, the radio waves come out and they gather together, and you get more. So the more you have there, the more it's like an individual one. I don't think it's not honest to say it doubles it, but it adds quite a bit to it. And so what it does is it's a way to concentrate. It's like a magnifying glass. It's a strange kind of a magnifying glass. It's a way to concentrate the signal and get it to be much more powerful and strong and project farther. Sound only goes to about 300 feet is the max at sea level atmosphere for sound to be completely reliable, to hear from the lowest frequency to the highest frequency. Beyond that, any little breeze disrupts it. Sound travels in air, so it's subject to what's going on in the air. There are times when I've played shows where I'd be at my mix board and a gust of wind would come by and the sound sounded like it was coming up from the town over there. You know, and it wasn't coming from the stage. And that literally happened. That was a real common occurrence. So piling up the speakers, we discovered, and then we piled up all the horns together, and then we began splaying them and aiming them, and that became the way that we hot rodded and was able to get as much as we could possibly get out of this old equipment. There's a mixer right there. My first mixer, this is an Altec mixer. It would mix 4 microphones. Now I had 6 of them stacked, one on top of another, and there was a way to link them all together, so that you get all of those microphones would go out one output and drive the sound system. And I had a special case made, and they were all in it. There's this big rack, and that was before mix boards and stuff. And so those are the mixers, and that part of it wasn't too bad. The amplifiers and the mixers were actually pretty good sound. Even by today's standards, those old mixers cough up a really good signal. They have good quality audio. They're good quality signal to noise. They're good quality, and I really can't berate those. They had that down. It was really the speaker part that didn't make it. That really needed help. Let's see, where am I here? Okay, so now we're going to get to this one here. This is the wall of sound, and I had this etching made. That's a scale. That is a 4 inches equals 1 foot scale. And what it was is that when you went to one of my jobs in the Grateful Dead was fronting all of the shows, making sure that the shows would work. Going to I would oftentimes get on an airplane and travel around the country, and it was called fronting gigs. I would front out gigs, and I would go to the places, and I had to explain to the management what we were doing, what we were bringing, what it looked like, what to expect, because in all honesty, it was in our best interest to be completely forthright and honest with everybody, and we didn't want. I wanted to maintain the good name, our good name, and for me, I didn't want any hanky panky going on. I mean, I wanted everybody to know, because you have to understand that when you go to a theater, and you say a rock and roll band's coming in, the stage manager and the theater manager, they imagine 4 guitar amps on the stage and a drum set and some guys like we saw the Beatles in 1962 or whenever it was, 64, a little teeny band, you know. And so when I was going to bring this into a theater, I mean the first time I went to some place and we started setting it up, they were like, well, what are you doing? Well, we're starting to set it up. And it got friction there, and we managed our way through the gig, but at that point it became obvious that, okay, from now on you gotta be up front and you gotta let everybody know what you're doing. So I had this made, and I have forgotten over the years who did it, but somebody did a really nice faithful job of it. And one of the things, as long as I've got this here, I want you to notice that that's all scaffolding that's holding all of those speakers. Now that's construction scaffolding, same stuff you see when construction companies are working on buildings and stuff. Very, very heavy duty scaffolding. We had 2 complete sets of it. It was so complex to set up, you couldn't do it in one day. So what we had is a dual set of trucks. We had a duplicate set of scaffolding, and it would leapfrog. When we would go on tour, the first set would go to the first venue, and the guys would be setting it up. The second set would be going to the second venue, and it would be being set up. And then after we played the show, we'd pull the equipment down and move to the next venue and set it up. So it leapfrogged. And that was this system. The Wall of Sound was a monumental amount of work. I mean, it took devotion. It took a lot of devotion for everybody to do it. So there were 2 whole complete sets and 1 set of equipment, and there was quite a bit to do that. I got involved in I was already working in recording studios. I was living in Larkspur, if you know where that is. There was the Larkspur, the bay had an inlet, we call it the Larkspur Channel. The bay, inlet bay goes up the channel there. It's all condominiums now, but there were houseboats in those days. And I lived on a houseboat there. And the houseboat next door to me was owned by the guy that produced the very first shows of the original old Fillmore Auditorium, Bobby Collins. And there was a band crashing at his house. Called Quicksilver Messenger Service. Now, I had known John Cipollina already, but we were already friends. He was in a band called the Chord Lords way before, when we were in high school, and I had known him from then. But being next door neighbors, we sort of got to know each other, and eventually they learned that I was working in a studio and I knew a little bit about equipment and stuff. You got to remember, I was 18 years old. I was just 18 years old. We were all teenagers, and nobody had any money. If your guitar amp broke, that was a disaster. I mean, there was no money to get it fixed or anything. So obviously it was, hey Dan, my amp broke, would you give me a hand? You know, so I got a lot of that, and I eventually wound up becoming conscripted into it. But being friends with John, he was always after me to go to see one of their shows. And I had working in a studio and I was doing bands. In the mid-'60s, record companies were sending emissaries to San Francisco, talent scouts they were called, and to scout out bands. And the studio I was working in was called Commercial Recorders, and it was in downtown San Francisco. Go ahead. Grandson? Lloyd's grandson. All right, I was going to say, the most wonderful man, Lloyd Pratt, gave me my start and he really taught me how to do it. I was just a kid, and he called me, hey kid, let the kid do it, you know. I volunteered. There was a radio, KSFO was having, it was Christmas time. KSFO was doing, this is probably 1963. KSFO was doing a Christmas benefit show for a home up towards Sacramento for disabled children. And so they announced they were looking for volunteers to help do this show. And I volunteered to be on the sound. Now, I had never really done sound. I mean, I knew what microphones were. I knew how it worked, but I had never really officially done it before. But I volunteered because I wanted to get involved. I wanted to do something. So I volunteered, and I went to this gig. And there was a lady named Tish Campbell, who was a singer. She was a big band singer, probably in the genre of Peggy Lee, kind of in that, and from that era. And she had a jazz trio that backed her, piano, bass, and drums. And she was one of the bands that were performing on this. And she was petrified at going there. She didn't understand the equipment and stuff. And I befriended her, and I got her microphone working for her, and I got her calmed down and got it working. And she sang and had a good show, and she had a good time. And so at the end of the show, I was talking with her, and she mentioned that she was doing a record. And I was immediately interested, so I began pumping her. And she told me she was doing it in downtown San Francisco called Commercial Recorders. And so I pestered her. I wanted to go to see a session. I kept pestering her. Finally, the night came. She said, okay, come on to the studio with me. I went to the studio, went down. It was on Natoma Street between Mission and Howard, just off New Montgomery. And it was right through the alley from 33 Hunt Street, if anybody knows what that means. But I went to the studio, and it was after dark, and I remember, and it was on the second floor. There was an old fire station, and it still had the fireman's pole going down through the studio, going down to the floor over in the corner. It was boarded off around the bottom, but the pole was still there. We walked up the stairs. The studio was on the second floor. We walked up the stairs. In those days, old recording studios were left over from that model, started from big bands and orchestras and stuff. So in order for the engineers to see what's going on in an orchestra, the control room were always elevated, usually in the neighborhood of 4 or 5 feet above the main floor of the studio. So you went up a second set of stairs, and you walked into the control room, and then you could look out through the double glass windows and see out over the whole studio. I remember walking into the studio and following her, and went up these little steps and went into the control room, and I went through the door of the control room, and I saw the tape machine and the console and all the lights on and all the equipment, and that was an epiphany for me. I about lost it right there. I knew I was home. I knew that was it. That was my home. And so I started hanging out at that studio, and Lloyd let me hang out and watch. I just hung out and watched, and he left me alone and let me do it. And what happened was, as I was saying, the record companies were sending emissaries. Now, it was an 8 to 5, 5-day-a-week studio, and they did commercials. And actually, during the 60s, probably 80% of all the commercials running on radio stations in the Bay Area came from that studio. We did the Giants. Russ Hodges and Lon Simmons used to come there and do spots. Willie Mays, all the players used to come and do stuff. Everybody, all of the known name people would come and do commercial and stuff there. And I got to watch all this, and I witnessed all of that. So Lloyd was an expert he was a bass player, and he was Downbeat magazine, jazz magazine, bass player of the year for 19 years, 1952 and 1953. Okay, so he was a heavyweight, and he was a master at splicing tape. In those days, there were no computers and nothing. The way you did tapes, you had a razor blade and a splicing block, and you would lift the tape out and you put it in the splicing block, and you'd slice it, and you'd cut out the piece you want and butt them together and take a little piece of splicing tape and put over it, and that's how you did it. And I mean, you could have, in a 1-minute commercial, you could have 20, 30, 40 splices in it, especially if you had to, if whoever was doing it the pros were mostly the people that worked at radio stations, and they could read copy and it was smooth. You could do it one take and bang, that was it. There was a start and an end. But there were people like Willie Mays would come and do, he was sponsored by Saxon Apple Juice, and he would come and do apple juice spots at the studio, and he was not a professional announcer, and so and those guys would come in, and well, as soon as they got to the studio, a fifth of whiskey would come out, and they would start getting really loose, and it was down to like splicing together a word at a time, and Lloyd could do all that stuff, and he taught me how to do that. I learned all that, but in that process, I was recording bands. So what happened was that the studio was dark on the weekends, and the record companies wanted to buy time on Saturdays and Sundays. And they wanted cut rate time to bring bands in to do demo tapes. Demo tapes was the medium in those days. There wasn't a Facebook account or a website or any of that. The only way that you band got noticed is you would make demo tapes and send them around to record companies. And so the record company executives would come and bring a band into the studio, get them recorded, and have a demo tape. And so what happened was that Lloyd wanted to play golf on the weekends. He wasn't really interested in that. He was making plenty of money doing commercials and stuff. And the studio was dark on the weekends. And so at one point, there was one time that there was a session for a Saturday, and there was some golf tournament or something he wanted to play in, and he called me up, and he wanted to get out of it, and he said, listen, kid, I got something for you to do. You think you can do this? And I said, sure, I'll take a shot at it. So I went into the studio, and and did this session with a band. Johnny Draper was the band. The band was called the Cheaters. And Johnny Draper was Rusty Draper's son. And he was a great songwriter and singer. And I did their demo tape for those guys. And then after the first one, it was every weekend, every Saturday and Sunday after that. And so I was working in studios. I was working for Mercury Records, producing records for Mercury Records. I was doing their blues artists and stuff like that. I had did the Sir Douglas Quintet. That song Mendocino, I produced that record, which is an annoying, repetitious song, but it was a smash hit for its 5 minutes of fame on the top 40. And as soon as that happened, I had all the work. There wasn't enough hours in the day, and I could do that. But then, so John Cipollina cons me into going to a gig with them at the old Fillmore. Finally got around to that. I made it back, you guys. So I went, and we get to the Fillmore, and the music had stopped. And there was, is there a doctor in the house? And Cipollina fingered me. He pushed me up on the stage. And I went up on the stage, and I don't, it's been too many years ago. I don't really remember exactly what I did. But whatever I did, it got it up and running in the band. And the opening band was the Grateful Dead. The headline band was Quicksilver, and the opening band was Grateful Dead. And this is for the opening band. So I went up, and I think it had something to do with Phil Lesch's bass amp. Something was wrong with it, and I fixed it and got it on, and they finished the set. And at the end of the set, Garcia came up to me and introduced himself and shook hands and said, "Hey, I want to thank you for giving a hand." And so I got to talking with him. I wound up going up to the dressing room and yakking with him the rest of the evening. I never did hear Quicksilver play. But one of the things that really impressed me was that the sound system there was a speaker about like that, one on each side of the stage. It was called an Altec 604, for those of you who know what that is. There was one on each side of the stage, and it was just gurgling noise that come out of it. You almost couldn't tell that it was on while the band was playing. And Pigpen was trying to sing Love Light, something like that, and it was just awful. And so I was accustomed to hearing the sound in full range and full quality in the studio, and I mentioned something to Garcia about how bad it sucked, and he basically challenged me. He said, put your idea. If you got an idea and you think you can do better than that, let's see it. And so I took him up on it, and I don't know why, I just did. And so what I did is I went. They were to play there 2 weeks later, so I went and somebody gave me a bag of hits of acid, and I sold it all, and I took the money, and I went to sound companies, and I rented all the sound equipment I could rent with the money I had, and I took it back to the old Fillmore. I went to the Fillmore was run by the Fillmore Corporation, and there was an old woman that ran the front desk, and if you got to know her, you could get anything you wanted. And so I got to know her and schmoozed her, and so they let me in a couple of days ahead of time, and I had to, first of all, these two sound companies, their equipment wasn't mutually compatible, so I had to change connectors and stuff to interface it all, so that it would all work together. So I did that, and Grateful Dead played the show, and it was a smashing success, I guess. It worked really well, and from then on, that was it. I mean, that was just, it never stopped after that. And then right after that, other bands began asking me to do sound for them, and I didn't have any sound equipment. So one of the two companies that I got sound equipment from was McCune Sound Service, Harry McCune Sound Service. Now, Harry McCune was in his mid-70s. This is 1964, 65, was in his mid-70s, and he run this company. He hand-built equipment back in the 20s and 30s when you couldn't go to a store and buy a microphone. You had to make your own. You couldn't buy a speaker, you had to make it. You couldn't buy an amplifier, you had to make it yourself. So he handmade his own condenser microphone to do, I think he did big band orchestras and stuff during the 30s and 40s, during the war. And he was a real pioneer. And he, for some reason, took a liking to me. And so I rented equipment from them and did shows, and then they wanted me to come to work for them, but I was working in the studio, and I didn't want to say no, but I didn't want to drop what else I was doing and go there. So I did some shows for them, but I never really lasted very long. But I did, one of the shows I did is over in Hayward. There was like a Rotary meeting. It was a Rotary dinner, and their guest was Trini Lopez. And so I took a sound system over there and put up the speakers and the microphone. And I did sound for Trini Lopez, and I did a couple of those kind of gigs, and it was fun. But the rock and roll world was calling me, and my studio stuff. the same situation happened in studios. Bands, we got to remember that we were all just learning how to play. And one of the things that you could do is you could turn your amp up and your guitar up really loud, and it sort of sounded like you were doing something, even though you didn't know. But studios were really predicated on calmness. Everybody, okay, now don't make any noise. We'll say take one, and then you play, and take two, and then you play. And the method for recording was really angular, and it didn't fit with the way, it was not organic enough for all of us. And so, because I was doing these sessions with the bands, I would do a session for a band, then they get signed, and then they get in the studio and they find this regimentation that they didn't like, so they started asking for me to be their engineer and stuff. So I started doing session stuff. I started out with Steve Miller Band, was the first band I did. And studios weren't, recording consoles weren't prepared for loud guitar amps and stuff. You put a microphone on it, and they didn't have adjustable gain. They had fixed gain amplifiers. And so you put a microphone on a guitar amp and you crank it up and it just distorts the microphone preamp, distorts the record board. And so I used to make up these loss pads in XLR body shells. You know what that is. And I would make up loss pad and I'd plug as many, 10 dB loss pad, I'd put as many together as I had to and put it in front of an amplifier. And I could get a good clean sound of the recording of a screaming guitar amp without amping out the equipment in the control room. And so, because it began to work, then that began to be more and more, I got more and more involved in it. And then I was torn between doing studio work and doing live sound work. And I liked them both. I loved them both. But a lot of it was demand too. There was a certain demand, and there's a time in your life when when you know you have to do something, even if you don't want to do it. You have to do what you know to be, what you believe to be the right thing. And so what I did is I did both studio and live as much as I could. I avoided going on tour until about 1960, last part of 1966, first part of 1967 was the first time I went on the road with the band. And the first band was Quicksilver. I used to be there. I was sort of their in-house buddy and stuff. And it was the Great Northwest Tour, which was Quicksilver and Grateful Dead and I can't remember the third band now, but anyway, it's a legendary tour. And we did the Northwest Tour in the middle of the winter, which was really weird. We played at the college in Ashland, Oregon, then we played a place in Eugene, then we played in Portland at the Crystal Ballroom in Portland, and then we played at a place in Seattle, then we worked our way back. And you gotta remember, we all had long hair. My hair was down to my shoulders. And long hair in those days were like, what you need is a haircut, boy. And that was everywhere, and that included the cops, and so you couldn't really go down the street. When we played in Ashland, our crew guys, they loaded up the truck after the show and they were on their way out of town. The cops pulled them over, took them out, made them unload everything out of the truck and searched everything for pot and stuff like that. In those days, you'd go to jail for pot seeds on the floorboard of your car. So, I mean, we were fighting that stigma too, but we overcame it all because what we were doing was new, and it was new and it was fresh, and we loved what we were doing. We were doing it for the fun of it. I mean, no one was making any money. Nobody knew who we were. We weren't famous. No one had any money. I mean, gosh, a set of guitar strings was wow. How do you have to go panhandle for it or something? Figure hit on your mom or something for it. But we followed. I guess we followed our dream. When you're there and you don't really think about that. When you're 19 years old, you don't think about stuff like that. I was just there doing it, and it went on, and one thing led to another, and it wasn't until in the 70s that it got to be really big. The audiences got huge. Instead of 1,000 people, it was 6,000 people, and so the venues got big. So everything had to get bigger. So we had the Wall of Sound. And so it was my gig to go front it out and get everybody and get the shock value. Go ahead.
Was there a moment where they said, okay, we got to make this big sound system, or did it just sort of grow gradually?
No, what it was is there wasn't really any good sound systems to rent. And it was all old equipment, and it was like, man, we've already gotten everything we can get out of it. It's time to try something new. So the Wall of Sound was based on line arrays, antennas, and it was based on absolutely cleanliness. No two things went through any one speaker system. So intermodulation distortion was non-existent in that sense. I mean, I'm sure there must have been some form of it somewhere, but all things had their own sound systems, and so it was pure and clean sound. It wasn't and also it had a frequency response that the bass columns were 36 feet tall. For Phil's bass, we made him a bass that had a separate pickup for each string. And then he had a stack of column of 15-inch speakers. You can see 1, 2, 3, fourth one in from the left, and 1, 2, third one in from the right. Those are the bass player speakers, and they each string came out of a separate group of speakers, or else he could have them all come out of all. But the object is that the wavelength of the column of speakers was long enough to radiate 40 cycles. The lowest note on a bass guitar is 41 cycles. So it was beyond 40. It was down in the 30s of cycles. If you do the math on the wavelength, the height of the column was beyond the lowest note of a bass. So when he played his low bass, I mean, it came out and it was there, and you never heard anything like that. And that was staggering. Have any of us heard the Wall of Sound? Yeah? Okay, all right. What was it? Was it awesome? Was it awful? What? Garbage cans rolling down flights of stairs? Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. Oh, good. Okay. Oh, good. How nice.
So it was a big expenditure, right? I mean,
pardon me?
It was a huge expenditure to create this.
Yeah, I'll get to that.
Bear say, let's go make this? Or?
No, it kind of came out of, it was a product, Bear had something to do with it, and Ron Wickersham had something to do with it. John Curl had a lot to do with it. John Curl designed a lot of the amplification stuff, all of the inner stuff, the low-level amplification stuff. He did all of that. I was kind of hoping he'd be here today because he's one of the ones.
He wasn't feeling well right when I called him earlier today. So
okay. All right. Yeah, he's a very dear friend of mine, and he's built some marvelous equipment that I've used for years and years and years. So it kind of grew. It started as an idea. It kind of started as sitting around drawing pictures on cocktail napkins and stuff, and then it got to be, well, maybe we can do this. And then Garcia agreed to get behind it, and we spent a fortune on it. And on the year we retired the Wall of Sound, we toured for 11 and a half months. We came home and we were broke. Okay, I mean, can you imagine, just the scaffolding alone, purchasing that scaffolding, it was monumentally expensive. There were times when like some of the stuff I did was amazingly successful. Some of the stuff I had some horrible calamities. And one time we bought all new high frequency drivers for the vocal cluster, electro voice tweeters, and I was running them off of a 350 watt Mac amp. I'll see if I can. There's some more examples of I'll come back to these. That's the center cluster there. That's a lot of speakers right there. They're 4-inch speakers. The very top row. Let's see if I can make this work. Well, you can't really see it up there. The very top row of stuff are T350 electro voice tweeters. And then the next row down, the 4 high ones, those are 5-inch JBL speakers, 2105. Then below that are 12-inch speakers, and those are the mid-range, the highs and mids and mid-highs and mid-lows. And then there was sub-cabinets right beside it. So the range of the vocal system was pretty much 20 to 20,000 cycles, and it did it. It wasn't real loud. It wasn't as loud as you might have we wanted it, and it eventually got to be where we couldn't play large enough venues with it, so we had to do something else. It was time to move on. When we retired the Wall of Sound, it was time to move on. Is what happened. It just was time to move on.
Dan, did you ever figure out how many miles of wire were involved?
No. Nope, we had 46,200 watts of RMS power. Okay, so that comes down to, so the amplifiers are not 100% efficient. They're about 60% efficient. So it comes down to about 200. It comes down to 192.5 amps out of the wall. Because we also had to run this too. Here's another thing: you can't just go and say, "Here's my sound system. You got a place I can plug it in?" I mean, it just that was just. You know, no venue had even near that. So what we did instead is, I'll take you there for a minute. we had to cough up a system for it. Well, anyway. Well, we were the electricians. We pretty much had, it was on us to do it all. Based on the amplifiers being about 60% efficient, there was 33,000 watts, and so it was about 46,200 watts out of the wall. Okay, power failure during a show was rampant and a common plague through the entire rock and roll world. Another thing is that we would be playing, and if we were playing overtime, or for some reason the administrators of the building didn't like us, they would shut off our electricity. And that has happened to us, you know. That wasn't uncommon. It eventually went away, but in the early days, they felt like they owed no respect or regard to us at all. If they didn't like what we were doing and they had some whim about it, they would just pull the power on us. So there's no possible way to find enough places to plug in extension cords and stuff. I designed and built a complete power distribution system, including a master breaker panel. And I had a number 4 multi-conductor cable that went from the master breaker panel out to a master disconnect, and then that went out. That would reach to where the electric service came into the building, and I would connect it right to the meter of the electric service coming into the building, so that even if the whole building shut off, we would stay on the air. Because it was also a big drag to have the electricity. You're right in the middle of a song and everything's grooving, boom. Man, you talk about the bottom falling out. And it made the drummers look bad, you know. But, which is actually always okay. But, so it also removed us from the electromotive interference that might be going on in the building, elevators and stuff. I mean, this is audio. This is really high-tech, high-quality audio equipment, and it's subject to electrical pollution that goes on. And so that was another thing that we always had to deal with, shielding and avoiding that. Going somewhere and playing where there was a radio station nearby, and the radio station would start coming out of all the amps and stuff. I had to learn how to filter all of that out and stop that from happening. And when you're playing Giant Stadium in New York, out in that slough, and there's 50,000 watt AM stations like 400 yards away from your stadium, you draw an arc. Your snake draws an arc against the ground. You know, it's that kind of, and you have to keep that out of the system. You have to learn how to do that. And that was a lot of work. It took me forever to figure that one out, but I got pretty good at it. So we had this complete system. Then when the wall came along, I just adapted it to the wall. The amplifiers, we had 55 Mac 2300 amps. I see if I can find one of those. There you go. We had 55 of those. I think there's probably one around here that you can find a real live version to look at. They were 600 RMS watts. They were stereo amplifiers. They were 300 watts a channel, RMS. It was also the very first transistorized power amplifier that was reliable, that you could roll down a flight of stairs and beat it up electronically and it would keep on running. I mean, I carried a complete shop. I carried an electronic shop with me in the truck. I had these big roller cases because I oftentimes would have to take them apart and change all the power transistors in them and stuff like that. So it happened, but for the most part, they were pretty durable and pretty rugged amplifiers. They suffered more from bouncing around in the semis, being able to put them in racks and support them in such a way that when they bounced around, they didn't fall apart. I mean, I've gotten to shows and take the front off the rack and all the amp covers faces are there and the amps are laying down on the bottom of the rack, you know. And so disasters like that happen. Making the system work and getting it on the air was always That was always a lot of work. That was a hard one, because setting it up is one thing, but then making sure that every single speaker is working is another. Make sure they're all in phase. The connectors we use, you couldn't buy good connectors in those days, and one of the theories of how we designed and built this system was that it was building blocks form. So you could set it up in any case. If somebody had some idea of, hey, let's try it this way, we could set it, you could implement it. That's why all the speakers were in individual cabinets. And it's very, very unhandy, but it made it extremely flexible. But the connectors were the kind of connectors, they're like a plug-in that wasn't polarized. So you could plug them in, plug in backwards, and then that speaker would be out of phase, and then it would be working against you. And so when you got a bunch of pot-smoking roadies, bless their black little souls, and you got to have them all plugged in. I had to phase check everything, every speaker in the system all the time. When we finally got the center cluster. There's the center cluster. That was finally all in one unit. It was one build. Willie Stryker was a welder that made motorcycle frames. He worked for Bill Graham. He made motorcycle frames, and he welded up this. We designed this, and he welded it up and cut it all out and built it. That was all made of steel frame on the inside, and then all the surface part was aluminum where the speakers mounted and stuff. And he formed it all and tapped it all and and had threaded fittings for it and everything, and he built that, and that's cut down the setup time by hours and hours and hours. And we were always going to have a second one for the keyboards on stage left, but it never progressed out of individual cabinets. We never made it there. It was a lot of work making that, and it cost a lot of money to do it. But there's an example of a speaker system right there. There's taken from the audience while we were actually playing. That's kind of the magnitude of what it felt like when you were there. That's Phil in his quad bass setup, and that you can see all the knobs on his bass. It looks like a record board or something.
Mission control.
Yeah, definitely. Go ahead.
He gave a talk at GXR a few years back, and he brought it out. Mm-hmm. And he said that he had to send it back to the guy that built it for him to figure out what the buttons all did because he forgot. He had that one, and he had another one that had TTL logic, and it was all little push buttons, touch buttons, and little LEDs and stuff on it that switched to different pickups and stuff. And that one was really strange. And when that got weird, it was getting that to work on the road was something. But we did it, and I'm glad we did it. Now there's a 350. There's a tube Macintosh amp. That is a monaural amp that's 350 watts, and that's what I run the tweeters with. And when I had a disaster, crossovers were passive crossovers. So the way that worked. It came out of the amplifier, then it went into this crossover network. And then out of the crossover network, there was one set of wires that went to the bass speaker and one set of wires that went to the treble speaker. And it separated the frequencies, so only the treble speaker only got the treble notes and the bass speaker only got the bass notes. A better way of doing it, which is very, very, very inefficient, a better way of doing it is crossing it over before the amplifiers. So the crossovers are all low level, or line level crossovers. They're all much lower level. And it's much easier to manipulate it at lower levels. You're not dealing with hundreds and hundreds of watts of stuff. So we built crossovers, and I inadvertently set the crossover wrong. I had a crossover that Carl Countryman made me that was continuously variable. It had 4 outputs, continuously variable. You could set the output frequency, and you could set the slopes on all of the input, all of the outputs of it. And I inadvertently set it wrong, and so we had all the T350 drivers. There was, I don't know if there's 30 or 40 of them in the center cluster. I blew them all out in one note, bam, just like that. At the beginning of the show, we were playing at Stanford Court. We set it up down there, and I blew every one of those out in about a tenth of a second. It was gone. So yeah, there was a disaster, but I nobody yelled at me, but I felt bad enough about it. That was a pretty low thing. I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to take you some other places here. Some of the unique things we did with the Wall of Sound. That is Universal City Amphitheater in Hollywood. Yeah, that's Universal City. Okay, now they had train tracks, and they brought their sets in on a train trolley cars and rolled it up in front of the proscenium backdrop. So that's our equipment there. And then we had to stop our setup because they had a tourist attraction show in there, and they had a Western front exhibit, and so the gunfighters would come in and get guns and shoot each other and drop dead on the stage and stuff like that. And had this, and you can see in the audience, you can see all the people in the audience. Those are the tourists that came in to watch it. So we had to haul up for that one, and then. Yeah, that's another version of the shootout that went. And you can see on the side there, you can see the scaffolding. You can see my there. I can point with that. You can see the scaffolding, the lights, and behind that are all the speakers and stuff. So we were allowed to set up on the side. We had to keep the front clear so that they could do their Western exhibit. And now here's an example. This is the Boston Music Hall in Boston, and there was a matching one in Atlanta, the Fox in Atlanta. And they were built by the Fox Corporation back in the 20s. And so we couldn't set up the scaffolding full size. So what I did was I designed this setup so that the you can see the upper level of speakers, they're all tilted back. I don't know if you can tell that perspective from look. They're tilted back because the State Theater had a balcony. So the bottom set of speakers for the people and what they call the orchestra section or the downstairs, and then tilt them backwards for the people in the balcony. And so we set up, we custom designed and built that, and it required configuring the scaffolding so that there were supports. So as the speakers tilted back, they had something to lean up against to support it all. Because the whole thing was safety too. It has to do with safety. You can't. Knock on wood, we never killed anybody. There were shows that had sound system fall down and seriously injure people. So we never did because our crew guys and all of us were very adamant about that. It's why we had to stop playing Red Rocks, because people would climb up on the rocks. They would be stoned and they'd fall off the rocks and they'd be jelly when they got to the bottom and stuff. And we finally, well, I wish I had a slide of this. This is a shot of my setup at Red Rocks, but you guys can pass it around. I had this is 5 stories high, because Red Rocks is a natural amphitheater that it's in Colorado. It's right out, it's southwest of Denver.
Morrison.
Pardon me?
It's in Morrison.
In Morrison, yeah, which is a little town. And in the WPA days in the 30s, it was a natural amphitheater, and it was turned into a movie theater. And where the stage is, they hung a big screen, and then out into the audience, there was a tunnel that went underneath and came up into this little bunker where the projectors were, and they showed movies there. And you go in the summertime, in the summer evening, and see movies. And so then the movie theater part kind of died out, and the area was there, but there were no longer any movie equipment there. So we would play there. We played there a number of times. And this system here, one of the situations was the audience goes up so high. The audience is 5 or 6 stories. The surface of the stage and the surface of a seat at the top back of the audience is probably 5 or 6 stories. It's really steep, and it goes up a long way. And so everybody stacked their equipment down on the stage and had it down low, and people halfway up, you couldn't really, my dream, and one of the things that really got me into this and got me to do this was that being able to be in a recording studio and sit in front of these monstrous, beautiful monitor speakers and mix sound and hear everything full range, hear all of everything. My dream was, I want to see. I'm going to figure out how to have everybody in the audience hear what I'm hearing. And so I went on a trip, and I got heavy into the sound equipment. And when I was working at McCune Sound Service, there was another young guy he's my age there, that was building sound equipment too, and he too was frustrated at sound equipment. His name is John Meyer, and he was building speakers too, and he had his own little speakers that he built. It was too small of a scale for what I was doing, but when I went on my own way, after we retired the Wall of Sound, we used rental sound systems. I used a company called Clare Brothers in Lititz, Pennsylvania, and then out of Texas there was a company called Showco, and I used Bill Graham sometimes. There's a great friend of mine who's a true audiophile, Jeff Cook. He had a system called Soundstorm, his little company. He handmade these cabinets. They were just gorgeous speaker cabinets, and they sounded really good. It wasn't enough to do a whole band with on the size of places we were playing. We would do tours. We had decided to split our tours for a while. We would do tours of small venues and then tours of big venues. The audience and the powers that be wanted us to stay. Our audience wanted us to remain in small venues because they felt it was more intimate and more fun. The bean counters wanted, we'd be playing on the moon if they had their way, So we sort of avoided that as much as we could, but eventually it got to the point of where we had to go to bigger places because when you're playing in a 6,000 seat venue and 20,000 people show up outside, then trouble happens. So you can't do that. You just can't disregard that. So we had to, go ahead.
Since you're talking about venues, what was it like the sound at the Spectrum in Philadelphia where the Grateful Dead played more than
I love that place. I love that place. One of the greatest nights was 1983, June 4th or something like that. It's all over. There's great versions of it on YouTube. There's the encore tune, Garcia doing Baby Blue. That's just the most kick-ass thing you'll ever hear. You put on a pair of good earphones or pipe it through a good amplifier system and it'll blow you away. And it's just a mix off my mix board. But it was a night when the band was just playing so well. And I love the Spectrum. I had a wonderful time there. Everything sounded good there. When we started playing hockey halls, I don't know if I finished, I kind of wandered away here for a second, but so John Mayer, So my dream was setting it up, configuring it so everybody in the audience got to hear a full-blown whammy of what it was like to be in front of the baddest ass sound system in the world. And I did it, and the Grateful Dead backed me and supported me, and I made it. I made it over the line. It was, Garcia asked for it. He should have kept his mouth shut, man. The speakers that you're seeing right now, those are John Mayer's large speakers. Those each have two 12-inch speakers, and they have tuning cones in them. There's cones that you have. They're very deep cabinets. The speakers set way back in them. And there's these big football-shaped things. So there's the sound coming out. Another way besides porting a cabinet to get rid of the bumps in the speaker response system is putting these cones in it, and so he has cones in it, and then it has mid-range horns. At one time I had 100 of these, 50 for each side of the stage, and then I had sub-bass cabinets that I would stack on the floor that would go along with it. But when you go, and I could fly them. In those days, these are all hangable. They all had fittings and there was mechanism and winches, electric winches and stuff that would winch them up. So they would group together in what we called arrays. We pick an array and group them together, and then you latch onto them and pull them up. And we would fly them. And so when we played sports arenas, which we wound up having to play because that was the only place that was big enough to accommodate our audiences and alleviate the huge crowds and stuff. So my job then became how do I sound good in a hockey hall, which is one of the most god-awful sounding toilets you've ever been in. Whoever designed them, they designed them to get people in and out without any particular regard to what the acoustics might be, even though they did events that required sound. And they had these ugly sound systems hanging by the scoreboard in the middle of those that we've all seen. But if you ever heard them, they were awful. And we would fly. I would bring the equipment in, and I would fly it all. I would advance the tours. Then I would come back. I had camera and I'd take notes and stuff. I come back. I had a drafting table. I would bring back architectural drawings of the venue. Then I would plot my sound system and the stage in the venue, and then I would forward that to my crew guys, and they would know how to set it up, and it would be to the nth degree. I made scale drawings of them, and I would spend weeks just setting up a fronting of a tour. But one of the things that we did is we hung drapes and curtains to absorb some of the echo and reflections in these sports arenas to kind of shut them up a little bit. And then there's these huge cardboard things called sonotubes. They're big round tubes, and they're a very thick wall. I mean, you can stand on them; they won't collapse. They're and they use them to pour concrete in. They make concrete pillars out of them, and then they cut them off after the concrete dries, and there's a round pillar. So so I would have sonotubes hung in venues, and because the sound would hit them, and because they were round, it would bounce, it would defray the sound, and so it would avoid what's called standing waves. There's another one for you. Standing waves are, every room has a standing wave. The distance between this wall and this wall, there's a distance in which a certain frequency will resonate longer and greater based on the wavelength between the distances there. And so I can hear the back of the wall. I can hear the standing waves in here, just my voice going back there. But the object is to see if you can break up the standing waves so that when you play music, one of the jokes we used to have is like, when I get to a hockey hall, I go, what is that? I hear that, here's some music. Oh no, that's left over from the last time we played here. Yeah. So that's a reverberation echo joke, But there was always a lot to do. There's never really enough. And I always felt like, gosh, I hope I got this right. I hope this is going to be okay. But there were nights, one of my favorite places is Madison Square Garden. We used to play there, and that is suspended. It has cables. It's like the Golden Gate Bridge is suspended on cables, the floor is. And there's been nights when the audience would be rocking in sync, and the floor would be going up and down that much. I used to have to hold on to my equipment because it'd be flopping around and stuff. I've heard nights in there that I never ever thought I would ever hear a sound like that. I mean, the audience went away, the band went away. It was just the music. It was all everything else went away, and we were blessed with maybe the greatest lighting director that ever walked the face of this earth, Candace Brightman. She could transform the audience. She could run the place. I mean, she could set up something that would create a mood. Then the audience. I've seen the audience where you could, in between notes, you could hear a pin drop. It was just amazing. I mean, 100% synchronized. Everybody was all together. Just fabulous. So they were really, really, really nice. There were other nights that the music, we never played the same show over and over again, and oftentimes in tours, a set would be more or less the same because we do these songs, they work best together, so that would be that set, and we do these songs, they work best together. But it was never like choreographed or organized like a lot of bands, like the Rolling Stones. Their show is note for note the same. And it's like we always did it different. So, but the treachery with that is that when it's different every time and it's not pre-planned, it can be fabulous and marvelous, but it can also, the train can jump the track, and it can be disaster. And there's been nights when to me it was just disaster, being a musician and hearing it, listening to it musically, I just wanted to slap everybody, It's like, oh man, you guys, what are you doing, But there are just times, it just happens that way. You can't, sometimes it's chickens and sometimes it's feathers, So, anyway.
When you said, we're talking about Candace Brightman, and you said about how everybody, got together. What was it that Candace Brightman did that kind of...
One night, we were playing in Madison Square Garden, and it was, I don't remember the songs. I don't remember things in terms of the shows and stuff. People always ask me, what's your favorite show? Out of 10,000 shows, how the hell can I possibly know that, I couldn't do that, but that's a show I remember. I wouldn't say it's my favorite show, but this one night, we were playing and it just got, like you could hear a pin drop. You just feel, everybody started looking around and we were all one person. And then she did this thing with the lights where she turned the room to ice. Just made it ice. And it was like definitely ice, and you knew it. I mean, you were in ice. And then a minute later, it turned to blood. And it's like, my jaw hit the floor. And the audience is like, But going through all of those emotions, she understood all of that. She did it because it was something that came from her heart. And she wanted I think she wanted what I wanted. She wanted to take care of. She wanted everybody to see what she saw, and I got it from. And that was me. I wanted everybody to hear what I heard. I wanted everybody to have a chance. You buy your ticket and you go in and you sit down and you get blown away. If you're an audiophile, you'd be completely blown away. And I got long trains of people that talk to me all the time that went to shows that are audiophiles. Just like, oh man, for me, my sound system was a musical instrument. It was an instrument to me. It wasn't speakers and amplifiers and microphones and knobs and decibels and all that. I got past that, the first 5 years I was in it. It's a musical instrument. It's like the difference between playing a Chrs violin or a Stradivarius. John Mayer made me a Stradivarius, and I played it, and I could play it, and I could make a room so warm and so happy and so wonderful. I could make the room go away with it. I could make the music so nice that it would go away. And it was never my intention to change the music. I never felt that I was changing it. And I never really manipulated or never thought about it in that way. I believe that if the audience just heard what was actually happening, if I could just make the sound system invisible and plug you psychologically right into what was happening, that would be the trip. That's the fat trip for you. And that was really the way I looked at it. And that was the way I approached it, and that's what I tried to do, So anyway, that's really about all I got to say. You guys got questions or anything? Oh, I do, yeah. Watkins Glen was well, yeah, I have one. Those are delay towers. So remember what I opened up? I said sound only works for about 300 feet. I don't care how much. You can have 5,000 horsepower, 40 billion watts of sound running 40,000 speakers, jamming sound out. After about 300 feet, the high frequencies begin rolled off, get stopped by the atmosphere. It just starts crapping out. So when we did big festivals like that, they would have big festivals and they would have speakers on the stage, and that was all there was. And if you're way back there, sometimes you could not even tell that the band was playing. And so what I did is I created sound reinforcement towers. Every 300 feet, I would put a ring of scaffolding and a ring of speakers. And then another 300 feet out, I put another ring of speakers. And the more farther out they got, the more numerous they became. And so I would do it from side to side of the venue. And then I would delay the sound coming from the stage, so electronically delay it so that when it came out of the first ring of speakers, it was synchronized with the sound that you would hear if it was coming by you. And then when it came out of the third ring, it was synchronized with the sound be coming by you. So it was all harmonious in terms. You never hear double stuff. Because if I didn't delay it, you hear two of everything. If you were 300 feet back, you hear something from the stage and you'd hear something from the delay speaker, and it wouldn't jive at all. So I contrived electronic delay devices. The first ones I used were tape delay, because that was before electronic delay, before the advent of electronic delay. So I'd take an oscilloscope and I'd take a microphone and I'd go back behind the first, I would go beyond the first layer, and I put a pulse into the sound system, and then I would have a microphone. I would have a microphone that was right at the delay tower, and a microphone that heard the delay tower speakers. And I put them into dual traces of a scope, and I watched that pulse, and I would adjust the time until the pulse was exactly at one on top of another. And then the same one with the next one. It would just repetition as your way out. Eventually, tape was a problem because the tape could break and stuff during a show, and then the delay towers would go off. When I did Watkins Glen, I had these German tape delay machines that I was told they used at the Vatican, and I rented these things, and because I had to make it work, and I didn't know what to do, and so I got these machines, and I brought extra tape cartridges for them and stuff, so in between sets I changed all the tapes. I didn't want to take a chance of the damn things crapping out on me, and that worked really well. But then when I did other ones, like when I did English Town, they had digital delay. A guy named Richard Factor invented this digital delay system, the first Eventide digital delays. But they were really noisy. And so I took Dolbys. I had Dolby'd each one of them to shut them up. A Dolby is a device that was designed originally, I guess Scott's not here, but our own Scott Robinson is a descendant of the Dolby Labs. Dolby was originally designed for the transatlantic cable, to shut up the noise in the transatlantic cable. That was the original concept. That was what it was for. And then that progressed into using it for in tape machines, tape recording. There was a certain amount of hiss and noise on tape recording. So then it was applied to recording, and Dolby would you would encode it, and then when you as you record it, you would encode it with the Dolby. We call it stretching, Dolby stretching it, and then you would decode it coming back. And so what it did is it emphasized the high frequencies greater to some degree, and there's a bunch. It's real complex, and I can't go into it right now. But there were all levels of compression and stuff, and then what's called companding, which is a combination word meaning compression and expansion. And then when you play it back, it reversed everything that you did to it, so you hear the pure music out of it. So I had double Dolbys around the delay lines. I had 2 encodes, I ran it through the delay line, and 2 decodes. And that's how I got it to shut up enough, because I didn't want it to sound good. I didn't want it to be noisy and grainy sounding. And then all that stuff got better and better, and pretty soon I got to where I could just get delay lines that were super quiet and super broad frequency response. And then I just hook them up and use them. But yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the double microphones? You see them in the Grateful Dead movie, for example.
All I think of is one time they had heating elements in them to keep them. They were condenser microphones, and when you sing into a microphone, your breath gets steam on it, right? So they would quit working. So they had heating elements to keep them dry. And one time, Owsley hooked up the power supply that runs the heaters to the wrong voltage, and they got almost red hot, and Weir walked up to sing and touched his lip on it and fried his lip. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy. The object of the differential microphones was that since the speakers were behind us, then the object was to not have the sound coming from behind us flood this vocal system. So if they were connected out of phase, if you have 2 microphones side by side out of phase, and you hold them side by side, and you talk into them, you won't hear a thing. If you take one away, you'll hear something. You put them together, you won't hear a thing. So out of phase microphones. So they were out of phase microphones. And then the object was you sang into one of them. They were spaced about that far apart. And then the object is you went up and sang into one of them, and then your voice would come out. But if you drove away, you couldn't work your microphone at all, because as soon as you drew back, you were gone out of the mix. So that wasn't very good. It didn't really work that well. And not only that, but if you do measurements of frequency and wavelengths, that far apart led stuff above about 4,000 cycles. It wasn't canceling, it's no longer canceling. So there's always high frequency noise and stuff in the system. So that didn't really work. Pardon me? Well, no, we did it for the life of the wall of sound, and then when that happened, what I came up with instead is I was at a movie theater. We were playing in a theater. I think it was the Warfield in San Francisco once, and I looked down on the stage and I noticed, being a player, one of the things you do so that you don't whack yourself and make a fool of yourself. When your vocal microphone is there, you step up to it. There's a home base plate that you put your foot. When you step up to sing, there's a place you put your foot. You know, if you put your foot there, that place, when you come up to your microphone, you'll be just right. Okay, so I noticed that everybody put their foot in the same place. And so what I did is I went and got a bunch of those pads, for burglar alarm pad things that you put under stairs carpets, and that sets off the alarm. And I taped them on the floor in that same place where everybody put their foot, and I connected them up to audio gates. And John Cutler built me a delay system where I could regulate the delay and stuff like that. So when you step up to sing, it would turn on your microphone. When you stepped away, your microphone would shut off. So it took all of that ambient noise out of the PA. And then for the drums, I also built a system. I discovered that I took, there was a little teeny electret microphones called Knowles Elements. They were little teeny. They use them in hearing aids and stuff, condenser microphone. The ones I had, I was told they were made for guidance, nose cone guidance in rockets. But I bought some of these. They're little teeny condenser microphones. And what you do is you take a drum set, and you suspended mine. I suspended mine. I glued mine to a piece of substrate, of circuit card, glass epoxy circuit card, and then I ran the wires out to the edge of the drum, and I suspended them on. I got those really good pure rubber bands. And I suspended them about that far below the drum head. And then I had little mini XLR connectors, those little half-size ones, in the side of the drum. And then I had them in every drum except for the snare drum, and all the tom-toms and floor toms and everything. Because I was dealing with drummers that, I had one drummer that was never a dull moment. And go ahead.
So how did you avoid feedback with all those speakers behind the mics?
Well, that was the object was the differential microphones. Yeah, and that sort of did it, but also there's a limit to how loud you could turn, how much gain you could use on them. But at any rate, so then I had so then I used those little sensors in the drum, and those fed gates also, which gated the drum mics. So I could have the tom-tom mics really loud in the mix, and there would be no leakage at all. And then a drummer would do a drum roll and would go across the stereo, and it was staggering, like boom, 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 wow, and the audience would go, you know, and I could get, and I could do all of that without ambient leakage. So my mix was like quiet. My sound system was quiet, except for when someone was singing or playing the drums. It was quiet. And the Hammond organ, I had a Leslie speaker that was built into a box, and it had microphones, and I had the gates on that too. So the Hammond was off, except for when you hit a note. I built a little sensor preamp thing that I put inside the organ that would trigger the microphone. So the minute Brent or somebody touched the key, it would turn on the organ mics. You know, it worked really, really well. It's why when you go on YouTube and listen to Grateful Dead mixes, that's why the mixes sound so good and they're so clean, because I had all that gating and stuff. You can hear everything really crystal clear, and yet it was never washed out sounding. So the vocal mics were not contributing ambient noise. The drum mics were not. All of that kind of stuff was filtered, was gated out of the system, and it worked very, very well.
So where was Betty Cantor in all of this? Talking about your mixes, her mixes are famous too. Were you guys?
Well, she did like live, like she had a Nagra, stereo Nagra, and she followed the band and would do live tapes and stuff.
Okay, so it was not off the mixing board.
It was not, no, it had nothing to do with me.
I was like a California Deadhead. When you guys played the Kaiser,
Yeah.
Oakland, like I would spend like half the time out in the corridors dancing. Did you type music out
No.
in the corridors?
No, but the Kaiser was what happened is after we retired the Wall of Sound, we just couldn't do it anymore. It broke our back. I couldn't do it anymore. And the band, I mean, I was pretty much unanimous. Everybody agreed. It had everything out of me it could get. And plus that, I think the real truth is that we had gotten everything out of it there was to get out of it. So it was time to move on. So when we decided to use rental equipment, and not be responsible for our own equipment, we did a system. There was a show that we did at the Kaiser that was, I think, the last time we played there. And we decided to just, instead of trying to rent something from somebody, we decided to put together our own fun system. So Pearson and me and John Curl and a bunch of us kind of got together, and we just scraped up all the equipment we could get. Bob Heil, rest his soul, had these tweeters that were the hokiest things in the world, but they were ribbon tweeters. And they had these huge big magnets that weighed a ton. And then I had Willie Stryker make these frames, and I got a whole bunch of them, and Bob's had a horn on him, but the horn was so far below the resonant frequency of the tweeters that they might as well not be there. So I took them off and threw them away. So I bored holes in these magnets and mounted them on these frames, and we hung them. I had these vertical array of tweeters, of these Heil ribbon tweeters. And then we had mid-range horns, and we had lower mid-range speakers and sub speakers. So we did this breadboard system. It was just for fun. At the Kaiser, and it was one of the nicest sound systems I ever heard. I mean, it was just that was a monumental time, and that's when okay, it's not renting equipment is not going to work. We're going to have something better than that. Clare Brothers, bless their heart, did wonders for us, and they were wonderful people, and I love them with all my heart. Everybody did. Everybody worked hard. Everybody was so good, but there was a point once you know once you know the truth about something, you can't unknow something. And it's like, okay, it's all good. You guys, I love you guys. I love all this, but it's time to go somewhere else. And that's when John Mayer made me a system, and that was an instrument, and that was my Stradivarius. And for the next 20 years, I played that. And and that was no one I don't know anybody that was ever any more lucky than I was at the gift of being able to do that. So, there's no comparison to that.
There's a question from Zoom.
Go ahead, Laura.
Did your live sound work help inspire you to start a radio station?
I'm sorry, I did not hear you, sweetie.
Is doing a live sound what inspired you to start KERG?
No, when I was a kid, God, you guys, okay, you got me. Okay, when I was a kid, I was always tinkered with radios, and I loved radios. I just did. I grew up in a little town called Weot, which is in Humboldt County. It had 220 people. And in the 1950s, there was no radio, no television. The only radio you get is late at night. You can get AM radio. I could get San Francisco, I could get Denver, I could get Portland. And so I would take my radio and put it under my covers and tune in and listen to radio shows and music and stuff from out of town. And I loved radio. But I always wanted a radio. I always wished there was a radio station in this little town. So what I did is I had a friend whose brother was a signal corps guy in the Air Force, and he showed me how to take an old radio and turn it into a transmitter. So I turned this old radio into a transmitter, and then I had a turntable and a microphone that I made out of an old earphone, and me and my friends would play radio after school. There was a redwood tree outside my house. I climbed up to the top of this redwood tree with a wire for an antenna, and you could get it all over town, and people all over town used to listen to it. And so we would play radio after school, and I always had that dream. And then in the 70s, when I finally had some income, I decided I would see if I could get a radio station. And so I applied, and I just thought it would be like applying to get a driver's license or something. So I applied to the FCC for a license, and I filled out reams of stuff, and they have all these topographical maps. There's just a pile of papers that thick that you got to go, that you jump through to file for a radio station. So I filed all of that, and then I didn't hear back from them for a month or 2 months, then 6 months, then a year, then a couple of years, then 3 years, and then I found out later that in Washington, D.C., there's these lawyers that are FCC specialist attorneys. And what they do is if an application goes in and you're not hiring them, they put your application on the bottom of the stack. So your application will never get to the top of the stack. This is a strange part of the story, but there was a friend of mine who was an heir to the Texas Oil Company, Texaco. And his name is Bruce Baxter. And he was a friend of mine, and he knew I wanted a radio station, so he bought a radio station in Texas, and he wanted me to come there and run his station. But that wasn't my home. My home was here. My sound was here, and the Grateful Dead was here, and I didn't want to do that, so I declined on it. But one night, I was involved in a recording studio with Mickey Hart. He had a farm in Novato, and we called it Hart's Barn. It was a barn that we turned into a recording studio, and it was a formidable, damn good little recording studio. And we recorded lots of records there. And Mickey and I were recording, and Mickey's lady friend, Cookie, and Bruce were partying. His house was like on the same farm. It was about a football field away from the studio. And she had a young daughter, and they apparently had taken some heroin. And so I think they took too much. And so we were in the studio recording, and Debbie came rushing in the studio saying, Dan, Mom's not breathing, you got to come. So we ran down to the house, and Mickey gave Cookie mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, and I did Bruce Baxter mouth-to-mouth until the ambulance got there. And it seemed like it took 5 days for the ambulance to get there. But anyway, was really grateful that he said I saved his life, which I don't know if I did or not, but I did what I did. And so he insisted on buying a radio station for me. So I said, no, I've already got the application. And so he already had these FCC attorneys for his radio station. I said, you stick them on my application. And he did. And within a month, I had my license. And I built KERG. And 50,000 watt FM station, and I handmade all the equipment for it. I built everything, and it was an audiophiles radio station. It was the purity of the audio. It's just, and I would, we had a program that I created called Dead Air. I would play tapes from tours and stuff. There was a Dead Air night, one of the nights of the week we do that and stuff. Now I gave that to Downtown Deb has Dead Air now. I gave her my Dead Air franchise. Thank you, man.
Where was KERG based, yeah?
Oh, at a little town called Garberville, which is about 60 miles south of Eureka. It's another little teeny town it's in Humboldt County. Okay. And the transmitter was on a mountain that's 5,500 feet, Pratt Mountain. So we could talk to Oregon. We could talk from Novato to Gold Beach, Oregon, and we could talk out to the fishing boats out to sea. Would call us on their radio telephones all the time and request songs and stuff. So it covered all. It would go over to Red Bluff. It was a beautiful station.
Was Kmart around there too?
And that came later.
There's a question from the Zoom. It says, could you say a word about the surround sound used in the late 80s, early 90s?
Okay. I had John Meyer made these speakers that were sort of like our center cluster. They were more full range. And there was two of them. He called them JM10s. And I rented them, and I would fly those in the back of sports arenas, like in the sports arena. I would fly them in the back corners, opposite the end of the stage, or like in Madison Square Garden, those ways. I would fly them. And then I had my mix console, I had a joystick, and I had apparatus that I had designed and built. John Cutler built some stuff for me. He built a panner for me. There's a picture of me. I had foot pedals in front of me on the floor. With my feet, I could move the sound around and stuff with pedals on my feet and a joystick. In fact, I used to let the kids do it. There's a great picture. Did you see of Sam? Yeah. One of our kids, they if you guys behave, I'll let you do the joystick. Okay, and then they would do that But what I would do is to take a break during the second set. We call it the weirdness section. I think the audience called it the drums, this drum in space. Drum in space. We call it the weirdness section, and that's where Mickey would weird out. And the drums, and actually sometimes on a good night, people will get involved in it with their guitars and stuff too. But, and I had the ability, I could take any instrument and I could make it fly around the room. Make it go all the way around the room. And I could do it either automatically or manually with my foot. I could move it or with a joystick. And so I had it all set up so I could switch it into this mode, and I could make stuff come from behind us. I could make this, like it sounded like roaring ocean waves, a huge tidal wave coming at you, roaring at you and stuff. And it was pretty impressive. It was a lot of fun to listen to. Some people liked it and some people didn't like it. I fought with band members over that, but I think the audience liked it. I think it was a fat trip. Was it a fat trip?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, all right. Yeah.
So, soundboard tapes. There are millions of soundboard tapes. Did you guys have something that people could plug into?
No.
How did it all get negotiated?
That was one of the sore subjects. The tapers was a big sore subject. Somehow, because it began with audiophiles, just bringing microphones and recording. But they were randomly spaced throughout the auditorium and stuff, and throughout the audience. And what happened is that as the sound quality got better and better, the equipment got better and better, and they got more and more interested, and more people started recording it, because you could record with microphones in the room and go home with an ass-kicking tape, okay? So everybody was bringing equipment, and it was really getting elaborate. But what was happening is that they had these mic stands, like big clusters of microphones, and sometimes you couldn't see the stage and stuff. And so there were places that there were promoters and and governmental agencies that wanted us to have shows that people that what we called assigned seating. I mean, our audiences wanted to just have it be a free-for-all, and for the most part, it was, and we didn't have any objection to that. But a lot of the money people wanted to be able to keep track of the money and the seats and stuff like, so they'd enforce assigned seating. So people would get a seat. So there were people that would buy tickets and stand for like 2 days in line to get a ticket and stuff like that. So all the time, it started out with how Healy's selling tapes. Healy's recording us and selling tapes, which I wouldn't. That was my very art. I never ever did any of that. That wasn't me, because it would be so wrong to betray your art. You know, I mean, how could you betray your art? But that was one of the things that went around. But then the nuisance part of the taper started happening. And one time, this little kid came to me. He was maybe 14 years old with his girlfriend, and he was crying. And he said, "This guy told me I had to get out of my seat," because some taper wanted his seat because it was an ideal. He felt it was an ideal place. He beat the kid up and threw him out of his seat, and that snapped it for me. So then it was, you have to stop. This recording's got to stop. And because the record companies always were, if you let anybody record your show, they're not going to buy your record, which is absolute pure BS. I mean, 100% has nothing to do with anything. It's just one of those things it's like a bumper sticker. It sounds like it makes sense until you think about it. You know, now wait a minute. You know, it was really a matter of nuisance. So what happened was, it brewed and brewed and brewed, and then the band came to me and said, "All right, you got to do something about your taper." My tapers, you know, they weren't mine. I didn't any more to do with them being there than anybody else. So I created the taper section, and if you were in the taper section, you had rights. If you were outside the taper section, anything I meted out was your tough shit, okay? If I took your stuff or broke it over your head, that was your problem. You know, you have rights here, and so all the tapers wound up behind me in my mix board, because my mix board obscured the seating and it took out all the seats anyway. That was another one. When I started mixing, the mixer was on the side of the stage. Those little mixers I just showed you a picture of, they were on the side of the stage. And you stood on the side of the stage, and as long as it wasn't feeding back, I guess the sound system was okay, right? And then I did Big Brother, and Janice was singing, and I realized I had no idea. There was horns playing, and Janice was singing. I had no idea what the musical blend. What does this sound like out there? And so I walked out and listened. And I was like, oh no, you know. So I realized that you can't represent the audience unless you're out there and can hear it. So I moved my soundboard. So what I did was I rented a ton of microphone cables, and I hooked them all end for end so I could take all the microphones and make them go all the way out into the house, hook them up to these little mixers. Then I ran a line back that ran all the amplifiers to the speakers. So I mix outside, and I would go somewhere unobtrusive, and then I used in the sports arenas, they call them vomitory. I call them vomitories. It's where everybody goes and barfs when they're too drunk and stuff. There's big open doorway things, and we call them vomitories. There's another name for it. I can't remember it. But I mixed there, and then some fire marshal had decided that, no, that's too dangerous. So then I said, I want to be right in the audience. I want a stereo sound system, and I want to mix from Stereo Center, because that's what I need to do. And I went to Stereo Center, and the promoters just, they had a cat, you know. I mean, that was like, I was offered anything ranging from a condominium on the Versailles to permanent residence 6 feet under, if I'd stopped doing that. And you know, and the promoter's attitude was like, the audience don't care. They're just there to get stoned. They don't care what it sounds like. I said, no, I care what it sounds like, and that's not what I'm here for. And I weaseled my way into the middle of the audience, and there was a lot of time where I had Bill Graham this close in my face a couple of times, you know. And I said, I don't care. I'm not doing it. And thank God Garcia said, if Healy says that's where he goes, that's where he goes. If you want us to play here, so I got to thank him for that, for being a brother about that, you know. And so. It was very short time, then that became kind of an accepted norm, and then everybody moved out there. But you can't, if you're not listening to what you're doing, why are you even there? You know, I mean, anybody can. Why don't I just flip a switch and go home? You know, I mean, what's the point? There would be no point in it.
Yeah.
So just to follow up on the taper thing, you never had a direct line that they could.
No, so what happened was I would let, if you got on my right side, I'd let you plug your tape machine in. Okay, so I had a few friends that I let plug in. Joni Walker, in the picture of me, this picture here. Joni Walker is right there. You see my pointer? That's Joni Walker. Okay, she was one of my little recorder taper pals. But I would plug people in, and sometimes I would do it just for no reason, just randomly. Or sometimes I would just randomly pick someone out of the tapes and say, "Come here, bring me your tape machine." And they'd go like, "What, are you going to take it away?" "No, just bring me your tape machine, man." I'd plug them in, you know. But I always believed that the music belonged to everybody. I never bought that we own this stuff. I never bought into that. It never seemed right to me, because all the years that I did what I did, and we all did what we did, so many of us put so much energy and effort into it, it never was for what we were going to get out of it, and that was never part of the thought of it, and it just seemed wrong to me. And I always felt like, for me, I don't record. Once the show is over, it's gone. That's it. Everybody thinks I have tapes of every show. I don't have. I have maybe once in a while I would take a tape home just to see what I was doing, make sure my mixes were sounding good and stuff. But I just have a box of random tapes of shows and stuff, and I just don't. I never was that guy. Somebody else. There are other people that are the custodians of all of that really fastidiously keep track of all. I mean, I know people that know all the dates of all the shows and where we played and all that. And it's like, man, I'm glad you commit yourself to that. If you asked me where I was yesterday, I'm not sure, you know. Boof. Boof. Yeah.
Dan, there's no question you push this to the art well beyond stacking A7s. But I know there's, on the West Coast, there's no question you're the guy here. But other people like Bob Heil and some others who are on the East Coast were trying to figure out the same thing. Was there any conversation back and forth between the people like you?
We didn't. I never really believed in the. I never had secrets and stuff. We never did it like that. Some guys did. I was never that guy. I worked in studios where I would come in to do an evening session, and the guy in the session before me would make the guy zero out the console. So he didn't want anybody seeing his secret settings and stuff. I left and let. I don't care who sees it. I got the ear. I'm the musician. The musician is my heart. Okay. When my ears translate into what my hands do and what I decide to do with the music, that's where the art is. It's not what the numbers are on the board. Numbers, you can recreate the numbers, it doesn't mean anything, you know. And so, and I was never really that secretive about what we were doing. The Bose guys had an anechoic chamber. They invited us there once to witness their anechoic chamber, and it was nice. I enjoyed that. But they were really, oh no, you can't go in that room. That's our secret stuff, you know. Oh, all right, you know. But I knew Bob Heil. I knew all those guys at one time or another, and we hung out, and we were all friends, and we would help each other. Like I could call one of them and say, "Hey, man, I need a blah blah." I could be somewhere and need a piece of. Hey, I need a blah blah blah. You got one? Yeah, I know a guy that's got one. I'll help you out. You know, so we would do stuff like that. You know, we were on friendly basis.
And one of the things, this kind of goes back to the surround sound.
Yeah.
Again, regularly on the other one, there was an effect that was placed on Bob Weir's.
Yeah, I would make his voice.
What was that?
I would do if you take a delay and you elongate the time while a word is in, it makes your voice go. Bleh. It makes it sound real outer space. And Weir hated me for doing that. I always thought it sounded really cool. Weir had no sense of humor about it. Weir took himself way too seriously, but he had no sense of humor about it. I thought it sounded really good. Yeah, I thought it was cool. You know, for me, if I thought of something to do, that was my purview, you know. I once told Jerry, I don't tell you how to play, you don't tell me how to mix, you know, and that's how it is. I mean, I knew how to do it, and I did it, you know, and I didn't need anybody telling me what to do. If it was that bad, that would have surfaced too, and I you know. All right, Arden. Hey, thanks, everybody. Hey, if you want to see a real killer sound system, come check this out.
Thank you, Dan. And thank you. If you enjoyed this, please consider making a donation. And also checking out our events on the website. It's chrsradio.org, and we have an events tab. Next month, we've got Ben Fong Torres, which should be very interesting. While you're there, you can become a member, and you can buy a brick if you would like to have your name in the front walkway. We also have a 50th anniversary calendar, and while you're here, you can look in the back and purchase a Bluetooth-enabled radio to take home. Thank you.